Hi, I'm Martin Webb, solar energy expert and climate activist. And currently outside, nature is accelerating its ecological deterioration and getting close to reaching what scientists call tipping points. Fortunately, at the same time, humanity is accelerating its climate action and reaching our own tipping points. For example, solar energy is now cheaper than utility power in most of the country, and EVs are now becoming cheaper to own and operate than gas cars. But what are individuals doing when they reach their personal tipping points? That's what we're here to discuss with our friends and neighbors to find out what steps they're taking, how are they thinking differently, acting differently, and communicating differently. So today I'm pleased to be joined by Song Kowbell, longtime Nevada County native and a neighbor of mine, to be the first guest on the tipping point. And part of the reason, of course, why I asked you is when I mentioned when I did ask you, you are doing so much. Many people aren't even sure what to do, and you have demonstrated the way that you live your life with your reduced consumption and self-independence. I'm really impressed. So when I asked you to list the ways that you're thinking differently now, as you've reached your tipping point with the climate and the environment, what did you come up with?
Well, one of the things that happened to me is when the lockdown happened, it really made things black and white in some way because the air got cleaner, the sky was bluer, the dolphins were back in the moats, the rivers, where everything was so much cleaner. You could drive on Highway 20 and there were one car. You could go from Penn Valley. So one of the things that made me really conscious of that was how I was living in my footprint in terms of how much driving I was doing. Now I drive easily under 1,000 miles a year right now. I'm hardly driving at all. I've got a new car 2.5 years ago, and I've only put 3,000, just under 3,000 miles on my 4Runner.
The average American, I just happen to know this because I came across it recently, the average American drives 12,000 miles a year. So to put that in perspective for our neighbors who are watching, you're saying that you are able to limit your personal transportation to about 1,000 miles a year.
I really pick where I'm going. I no longer go someplace for fun, very, very, very seldom. Do I get in my car and say, oh, I'm going to go here just for pleasure? I have a really intense sense of what I owe the planet and what I owe the kids and the grandkids. And I can't get in my car without thinking that, who's going to get asthma from me taking a pleasure trip today? What animal's not going to have the water? How climate affects the animals has been really impactful to me.
So it sounds like, because for me what I've witnessed, this is an important part of people taking climate action, is making the environment now, even if it's a small part, but some part of their decision-making process. So that before you do something or consume something or turn on a light or drive to town, you're thinking now about what the impacts are, as opposed to, I just need to go do this right now, I'm out.
Yeah, and I also quit buying things that are mostly packaged in plastic. If they don't come in glass, I've cut off so many things that I don't need anymore.
That's very hard. Even, for example, I shop at local natural food stores as much as I can, and so much of the food is now encased in plastic.
That's right.
And I like to tell people, think of plastic as just a hardened oil spill. Plastic is a petroleum product. So we're used to being disgusted when we see massive oil spills, but when you see plastic everywhere, it's like oil being spilled everywhere. Right. So that's a way that you're also paying attention and thinking differently. It sounds like you're thinking about whether you need to do something before you do it and the impacts, but then your purchasing is also different.
Well, one of the things that changed 2 years ago is that anything I buy in a jar, I can in jars now. If I buy something that comes in a jar, that now becomes a canning jar. I open it really different, so I'm not like bending it. So that has changed tremendous. I'm not buying canning jars because whatever I buy in the store then becomes a canning jar.
It's great you mentioned that because a lot of people buy products that could be multi-use but are intended to be single-use by the manufacturer, and they can be used over and over. And one of the things that I think differently when I purchase things off the shelf, and I tell people this, is whenever we buy something or consume something, we're actually consuming two of it. Because anytime you buy something and pull it off the shelf, think of a string connected all the way back to the factory. They get the message, make another. And so if you don't purchase something or use something, you're saving double. So the idea of turning single use into multi-use, bravo.
That's also why I shop at weirdo stores as opposed to just organic stores or health food stores, is because every time I buy something organic from Holiday Market, they have to buy another one to replace it. And I think that gets organic movement into all the stores as opposed to just, it's kind of like singing to somebody who's not in the choir at the time.
So what I hear you saying when it comes to thinking differently is you stop and think, do I really need to consume this, whether it's gas to get somewhere? But then if you do feel like you do need to buy something, that you think consciously about what you are buying. Do I need to buy something in plastic? I do the same. If I have a choice of mustard on the shelf and it's both organic and it's both made local, if one's glass and one's plastic, I'm buying the glass.
Yep.
And that you're also aware that you're sending signals then. We all are sending signals. We're voting with our dollars. So we've touched on ways that you act differently. What are some of the other things that you do differently? And we talked about ways that you think differently. What are some of the common ways that you act differently? Because I want to preload your answer by saying the things that I'm impressed by. I see you grow a lot of your own food. I see you taking care of your own little small herd of animals. I see you caring about not just yourself and your animals, but also the flora and fauna and insects around you. So when I said be prepared to talk about some of the things that you're doing differently and acting differently, what did you come up with?
Well, one of the things that I do differently on my farm is when I bought my farm, it was all blackberries. And instead of, it's also a major Nisenan tribe, Nisenan village. And so instead of having machines come in and clear blackberries, I've had the goats for 12 years, and not only have they provided, just beautiful clearing on the land, they're gentle to the land, they don't disturb a lot of things, and they provided milk for me and excellent company. So that, they've made the land beautiful. When I moved there were no fruit trees. Now there's 22 fruit trees.
Wow.
Which is, and there's grapes and blueberries, and I think that we have to keep planting. I think that that's really important, and not worry if we're going to be the ones to harvest it. I think it's, I think we have to pay it forward in everything that we do.
Well, a couple of things that I like that you mentioned. One about the goats. We've probably all seen in the community more and more working goat herds. That you don't have to permanently own the goats. There are now groups that will bring their goats out to not only clear so that you can plant, but you and I also talk about fire danger, and that the goats help with the fire danger. And that one of the things we've also talked about is how we think of our property like an oasis for birds and butterflies during these times. One of the interesting things I read this year was a study showed that if every person that had property kept a small patch wild and didn't mow it, didn't put chemicals on it, but chose a certain part of their land to keep wild, that if everyone did that, it would be the world's largest preserve for biodiversity. And that's the difference, that, small things that each of us do add up to either a big solution or a big problem. And so
I'm laughing at that because there's so many weeds in my yard that I have never left in my yard before. The thistle, I've been such a grump to other people sometimes about not letting that thistle grow. But then I realized that the finches are at it like crazy. Horehound, I absolutely despise horehound. It follows me from farm to farm. And there's a big patch up in the back above the grinding area. And I went up there and I was like, I'm going to take the weed eater and get it. But I went up there and it was full of butterflies and bees. I'm like, no, you're not doing that. So there's all these things like that, weeds that I would love to get rid of, that as soon as I look at them and there's somebody foraging from them. I've had 52 monarchs in my yard this year.
What I want to stop and point out is you're describing one of the most potent forms of climate action, and that is paying attention. A lot of people feel like climate action means buying stuff. We're going to shop our way out of this. Tell me what to buy next. But I really believe that you're an embodiment of paying attention, because once you pay attention to nature, like you said, you can see what it's doing and what it needs. And a relationship with nature tends to make us care more about it. And so I resonated with you when you talk about that, because I've done the same thing. Normally I mow my lawn. But then I saw a patch of clover and there were beautiful flowers and there were bees visiting it. And I know we need the bees and insects. So I mowed around it and that was one of my patches. And now I have a very patchy lawn and neighbors have asked me about it. Said, I thought maybe you were writing a message or something that only you could see from your roof. And it gave me an opportunity to say, this is what I'm doing and this is why it helps. And positive communication like this is so important, not just lecturing and saying this is how bad it's going to be, you should, just walking the walk as well as talking the talk. Now, then to piggyback on the walking and talking, what I've discovered, and this is a big reason why we're doing this show, is that studies show people aren't talking about the environment or climate change. Overwhelming majorities of Americans are concerned or alarmed about the climate. Mm-hmm. But the majority of them rarely or never talk about it. And there's a small slice of people that talk about it. So everyone cares, but everyone thinks no one else does because we're not talking about it. That's no way to solve a problem by staying quiet. So partly why I'm going to challenge each guest on the show to then also talk about how they're communicating differently is because so many of us are taking action, thinking differently, acting differently, but then we're keeping it to ourselves. And it's become an art to actually figure out how to talk about it without shutting people off. And so what ways are you communicating differently? Because I've heard you talk about bringing it up with friends and in social media. So how are you communicating differently about the environment and how you're thinking and behaving differently?
I want to say that there's some comfort in not paying attention. Because
ignorance is bliss kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, we live on a beautiful road, but there's no way to escape how many oak trees have died coming in just the first mile through the Haregi Ranch. There's just, and that's incredibly painful. It's in your face. I live on a Native American site where there's all these mortar holes, and that's what they left behind. And so I'm constantly doing that. Mostly I talk to people about not driving a lot. I encourage all my friends. My vet just got a car like yours, a hybrid, because I was always after her about driving so much. I think the other thing is fire is a major concern for me because fire is really, so I'm always encouraging people to weed eat. My house, if you look at my place, it's the interior isn't that weed eated, but the pastures, I've got my pastures green. We have a really lucky opportunity on our land because we have a big open long space where we could slow a fire down. And I think that needs to always be in our thoughts during this climate change is we need every tree we can save. And
so you're communicating not just to friends and neighbors, but also, because I like what you touched on with your vet, is in a business setting, in a business opportunity. I've discovered the same thing, that there are sometimes opportunities to just make a casual mention. Oh, would you like us to do that? No, that's okay. For the environment, I don't need you to do that. And it's not saying anything bad or negative. It's a way to just put that awareness out there. And what you said about your vet is showing that you can actually influence how people think and behave, and that's really a big part of the climate solution. So I encourage you to continue to not be quiet about what you see can help make things a better world. So
we're standing on the best planet in the universe, we have to quit shooting holes in our boat.
Yeah.
We have to take care of her.
One of the things that you and I are aligned on, I remember chatting with you about thinking about all of our different actions as a credit card from the future.
Yep.
That we're taking things from the future and we're going to leave the bill for our kids and grandkids. So
I feel like I've already used all my mileage for driving. In all honesty, I do. I feel like every time I get in my car, it's like, okay, who am I borrowing? Who am I taking this from now? Who can't, Our planet needs help.
Now, one last thing then before we go. Could you verify that thinking and acting and behaving differently brings you a sense of satisfaction, perhaps joy, peace? Because there is a myth or a misperception that doing some of the things we need to do means major sacrifices, means being sad, wearing sweaters in the dark. But in most cases, and studies are showing this, that the actions we take alleviate eco-anxiety, make us feel healthier, happier, and oftentimes save us money. Could you verify or talk about it? Do you feel happier as a result of the actions that I see you taking and you're sharing with the viewers?
Yes, I do. I mean, I got a phone call from you a couple nights ago. I saw the fox. You know, I mean, the way that we care about the wild animals, the way I cut some holes in my fence so the fawns could go through. I think leaving nuts for the tree, for the gray squirrels in the tree where I've got my little red bucket of water for them. You know, I have when I walk out into my pastures, I have such a sense of peace.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Song, thanks for joining me on the very first tipping point.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. My name is Martin Webb, solar energy expert and climate activist. This has been The Tipping Point, where we talk about how individuals are reaching their tipping points and what they're doing about it. We hope to inspire you by having peers, friends, and neighbors on to share what they're doing. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next month with another tipping point and a new guest.